Hello everyone, my name is Ogunye Adebamigbe and today I'll be explaining some core topics in cloud server administration, and one of them is the virtual machine. The virtual machine is a software-based emulation of a physical computer that runs on an operating system and applications. It is just like a real machine, but it works on a computer host. And the virtual machine has some core components that actually makes it work. And I'll be listing some of them and explaining a few. The first one is the hypervisor. Then we also have the VNIC, that's virtual NIC, that's virtual network interface card. We also have the virtual RAM. We have the virtual storage. And there's also something called the guest operating system. So let me start by explaining the hypervisor. The hypervisor is the main software that creates and manages virtual machines. It also allows the virtual computers to run on a physical computer. We have two types of hypervisor. We have the bare metal hypervisor, that's the type 1. This particular hypervisor runs directly on the physical hardware. Then we also have the type 2 hypervisor. This type 2 runs on top of the operating system. Another key component is the virtual CPU. The virtual CPU is a virtualized central processing unit that works on the virtual machine. It works in a similar way the physical CPU works. That is, the CPU that works on a physical computer performs the same function as that of the CPU that runs on a virtual machine. Another key component is the virtual RAM. The virtual RAM is the RAM allocated to a VM. The hypervisor manages this RAM. It could be 16 gig RAM, it could be 8 gig RAM, and also it could be 4 gig RAM. Then we move to another component, which is the virtual hard disk. It's also the virtual storage. The virtual disk is a file that emulates the physical hard drive. It stores files and applications on the virtual machine, but still in a soft version. And some of these formats may include the VMDK, that's the VMware, or the VHD, or the VDI. The VDI works on a virtual box. Lastly, we have the guest operating system. The guest operating system is installed inside the VM and it runs independently but depends on the virtualized hardware. An example is Windows Server 2022. We also have the Ubuntu server, and we also have the Red Hat Enterprise. That's on Linux. Now, let's bring virtualization into the real world. Let's assume a scenario. I'm trying to explain the importance of a virtual machine in a real world or in business enterprises. Imagine there's a disaster. It could be flood, it could be theft, it could be any form of disaster. It could be a natural disaster of any occurrence, and it strikes a particular building or a particular organization. The data, the services, and a lot of files may be lost if they are in hard version. But let's assume they are in a cloud version. The business is safe, right? For instance, we have examples. Some of the examples of clouds that may be used are Google Files. We have the Google Drive. We have the Microsoft Cloud. Data can actually be kept on these services for relevant purposes, for various purposes. It could be for a quick recovery, and it could be for security reasons. Another importance of virtualization is for testing and development. Let's assume a developer wants to test a particular application or a particular software and requires more than 500 computers. Virtual machine saves cost in this regard. That is, the developer does not need to go ahead by setting up physical hardware of about 500 or 1,000 pieces. Instead, all these applications or these services can be run on a virtual machine. Another important topic we'll be exploring today is the server roles and server features. So let's ask ourselves, what is a server role? A server role is the main job of the server. That is, it defines the server's primary purpose on the network. That is, when you install a role, you are telling the server to perform a particular function. So some of these roles may include the ADDS, that's the Active Directory Domain Services. Another role is the DNS server. Another role is the DHCP server. Another role is the web server, that is IIS. So let me tell you one of the examples of these roles. The ADDS, it makes the server a domain controller. That's what it does. And it manages users' passwords, computers, and security. So the DNS server, what it does is that it translates the domain names, DNS. It translates the domain names. Also, we also have the DHCP server. The DHCP server automatically gives IP addresses to devices on the network. Another one is the web server. It hosts the website. So, going to server feature. A server feature is a supporting tool on the network or on the server. That is, if there are features that are performed by the server, or let me say the attributes of the server. These features do not define the server's main purpose. They only enhance or support these roles. And some of the examples may include the BitLocker encryption. So what the BitLocker encryption does is that it protects data on the server. It has like a security to data on the server. It also protects the hard drive. Another one is the .NET framework. It's required for many applications to run. That is, it makes application run smoothly on the computer. Another one is the Windows Server Backup. That is, it allows backup on server data. We also have another feature called the failover cluster. This failover cluster helps to create high availability terms. So when making use of a server, there are ways in which we can determine the roles and features that could be performed on them. But before that, we need to ask some basic questions. And one of them is, what problem are we solving? So if we determine the problem we are solving, it will be easy for us to actually know the kind of feature or the kind of purpose we want to serve on the server. For example, if we are solving a problem of centralized login, we need to install an Active Directory domain service. Also, if we want to assign an IP address to our devices, we can simply go ahead by installing a DHCP server. Secondly, another question we can ask is, what services must this server provide? This is another key importance. This way, we ask ourselves some mini questions. One of them is, will this server manage users? That is, we want to determine if this server is going to be managing users. Also, we want to ask ourselves if the server is going to be hosting applications. Another question we want to ask ourselves is, will it be able to handle network services? This will enable us to actually know the roles and features that will be performed by the server. Also, we can ask ourselves if it's going to be storing files or if it's going to be acting as a backup server. All these roles will make it easy for us while setting up our server. Also, when setting up our server, we need to know the kind of supporting tools that are required in determining, and for us to determine this particular question, we need to know the type of tools that will be required while setting up our server. An example is, if I am installing an ADDS, for example, the DNS role is usually required. Another key aspect or key topic we'll be exploring today is the Active Directory and the role they perform. That is the purpose of the Active Directory and how it facilitates users and resources. So let's get into it. The primary purpose of the Active Directory is to provide a centralized management for users, computers, and resources within a network domain. The Active Directory allows organizations to control everything from one centralized location instead of configuring each computer individually. All of these can be done from a single computer. And some of them may include, you could store information about the user account, the computers, groups, printers, shared folders, and the security policies that should be applied to each of these computers. So let me explain how Active Directory facilitates user management. One is centralized authentication. When a user logs in, the entire username and password, the domain controller identifies the identity. That is, it can assign a username and network for all the users on a network. Also, it performs the role of an authorization. That is, it gives access or control the affairs and the management of a particular server. It could be authentication, it could be after authentication, it could be Active Directory file determinations. You could determine the type of files each users or on a computer or on a network can have access to. Also, the Active Directory helps in managing resources. It manages groups, domains, and organizational units. The Active Directory is so powerful that it could perform some very important functions on a server or on a network. One, it could be used to create a new user account. It could be used to disable or delete a user account, and it can also add a security policy to a particular user account.